Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage. Today I was just going to do a little project. I was going to switch out my two-way radio antenna because it's getting a lot of interference where it's at. And of course that turned into a bigger project. So I'm actually going to switch out the antenna, but I'm also going to switch back to an old two-way radio that I was using previously. And I'm also going to go over with you some of the things that I've been using over the last couple of years. So it's a hot one out here in the garage. I'm drinking a lot of water. Let's get to it. All right, let's talk radios. There's a lot of different options in two-way radios. The first one is ham radio. Now, I'm not a licensed ham radio operator, but this is an option if you're licensed. There are some groups that use ham radio on their trail runs, and I have this just so I can listen into that. But for the sake of today, we're going to talk about GMRS, so General Mobile Radio Service. Options there. So if you're familiar with just the two-way radio walkie-talkies that you can buy pretty much anywhere, those are called FRS, Family Radio Service, and they use the same frequencies as GMRS. And this is a GMRS handheld, so you could talk to the people that are using the FRS radios, the little two-way radios. And this is great because you can use this while you're out spotting somebody. You can jump out of your vehicle and run down the trail and still listen to what people are saying. I always bring a couple extras of these in case somebody needs a radio, or maybe they're new to off-roading and they don't have purchased something like that yet. So I always keep a couple of these with me in the Jeep. So I use these quite a bit. Now, one of the radios that I had bought previously was this Midland, and this is the Midland MXT275. It's a 15-watt radio that you mount in your vehicle. And the cool thing about this one is it's really small. There's a lot of mounting options for you. Originally, I had this mounted in my glove box because it just fit in there. I had some Velcro on it, mounted it in there. The only thing is you can't hear the speaker. You have to use the speaker that's in the microphone, which is okay, but it's not super crazy loud if you've got a lot of things going on. But this is small, compact. You can mount this in the spot below your steering wheel in a Jeep JL. There's that little panel that flips off. You can mount it under the seat. So a lot of different options you can do with that. Microphone on this guy is pretty solid. All the controls for this are on the mic. So your volume, your on and off, your channel changing, everything is right on the microphone, which is nice. So if you want to mount that box somewhere out of sight, out of view, it's really easy to do that. The only thing that I don't like about it is this coiled cable is so tight. It just puts a lot of tension on it. So I don't know, that's kind of minor, but that was one of the things about that. But this radio, super portable, because you can just plug it right into your cigarette lighter in your vehicle. It comes with an antenna that you can just mount to the roof of your vehicle. It's magnetic, so it's kind of tough on a Jeep because the top is plastic and the rest of the Jeep is aluminum, so it doesn't stick. But it is a great thing from portability standpoint. So some good advantages on that guy. Now, the radio that I'm going to reinstall in my Jeep today is this one. This is the Wouxun KG-1000G. I bought this a couple of years ago. There's actually an updated version to it now. This radio originally, this version was based on the ham radio version. So they just, I guess, retuned the frequencies or however they do that. But this one is a 50-watt radio. And there's a couple things that I like about this one. It's got two speakers in the unit itself because you can listen to two different channels. So maybe your group is using one channel, but there's a group ahead of you and you want to kind of listen in on what's going on there. Maybe there's an obstacle that they're going through. You can monitor a second channel, so that's nice. The other thing that I like about this is this faceplate is removable. So you can mount this faceplate remotely, maybe up on your dash or somewhere within view, and mount the rest of the unit somewhere out of sight so you don't have to see it. So that's a couple of great options on this one. Now, you do have to permanently mount this one, permanently wire this one. You can't run it off the cigarette lighter just because the 50 watts in the radio just requires a lot more power to broadcast that. As for the microphone, I actually kind of like the microphone on the Midland a little bit better, and that's why I've gone back and forth on these a few times. But this is the microphone on the Wouxun KG-1000G. There's a lot of buttons on it, but ultimately you just need, to be able to push the talk button. So I'm going to mount this in the Jeep. I'm going to do the antenna, and let's get started. All right, I think we're about ready to get started, but first I want to show you some things about the wiring on my Jeep specifically. So this may apply to you if you have the auxiliary switches on your Jeep. Now I have a 2021 JL Rubicon with the switches, and you can see down here I have the 4 auxiliary switches. Now these switches are rated at different power levels. I see all kinds of questions on Jeep forums, on Facebook, on groups, on how to wire things up to these. So I'm going to show you the basics, but the number one thing that you're going to need is your owner's manual for your vehicle. So let's take a look at that. So this gives you all the detail on the different switches, and you can see the 4 switches. So auxiliary switch 1 is rated at 40 amps, and it tells you the wire color. Auxiliary switch 2 is also rated at 40 amps, and it tells you the wire color. So green, pink. Auxiliary switch 3 is only 15 amps, and it's orange pink. And auxiliary switch 4 is 15 amps, and the color is dark blue and pink. And then it tells you where they're located. So on the Jeep JL, with the switches, there's actually 2 places where you can wire this. There's wires underneath the passenger side dash, and there's also a bundle of wires under the hood. So you can use either or that's most convenient for you. So, but now this radio, the KG-1000G, I just looked it up, what the max power draw on it is when you're transmitting, because that's when it pulls the most power. And it'll pull about maximum of around 12 amps. So this auxiliary switch number 1 will have plenty of power to run this when you're transmitting. I wouldn't hook it up to the 15 amp. That's just way too close to the max power on that 15 amp. So I'm going to hook it up to auxiliary switch 1. Now the other thing that you can do with these switches is you can program them to be only powered when the Jeep is running, or you could also switch it where it's powered when the Jeep is not running. Now, of course, you run the risk there of killing your battery if you're running it too long, but let's say you stop on the trail and you shut your vehicle off for a little bit, I can still have the radio running, and it only draws a very small amount of amperage when you're not transmitting, so that would be fine for a short amount of time. So I'm going to have that switch number 1 programmed to still be powered when the vehicle is not running, to give me that flexibility. Now you have to remember to shut it off when your Jeep is not running, or it's parked, or you're going to be stopped for a long period of time. So, but that's going to work out for me. Now right now I have this wired under the back seat for the Midland, because I just had this under the back seat. Now excuse the mess, I'm working on another project here, but I had it so I could just run the cigarette lighter plug, and I could also run a USB back down here as well. So the other project, details coming, but I've been working on that for a while. So let's take a look at a few things I'm going to need to install this radio. Now, I was talking about the detachable faceplate on this one. It slides off of the main head unit, and this is all that you're going to see. I'm going to mount this up on the molle panel, kind of above the drivers, between the driver and the passenger seat. And that will mount onto this. It slides onto this, which is what I'm going to mount that on. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to need a couple of cables. One of these cables is going to be able to run the microphone from the head unit, because it plugs into this piece. I'm going to run it all the way down under the seat to the handheld microphone. The second piece is what you need to be able to connect the remote head unit down to the base unit. So you need a second, I guess it's like a Cat 5 cable is what they run on. Now, last time when I took this out of my Jeep, I didn't leave a whole lot of room here on my ground wire in order to mount this wiring harness, but I should be able to make that work. That shouldn't be a problem. And then this guy just plugs into the unit itself. So Shouldn't be too bad of an install from a complexability standpoint, because like I said, I'm just going to run it to that current switch that I'm running the Midland off of. So there you go. First thing I need to do here is get these freedom panels off. So let's take care of that first. Now with this molle panel up here, it makes getting these things unlatched a little bit challenging. You have to kind of finagle it a little bit. Now because of where I'm going to mount this, I'm going to have to move this switch panel. I'm probably going to move it back a little bit here because I'm going to put the actual head unit right up here with good visibility to the screen and the channels. Now, one of the cons of this radio is the screen is not dimmable. You can either turn the brightness off or you can turn it on. And at night when you're driving and anytime there's a transmission that comes through, the screen lights up. So it almost kind of just blinds you. So typically at night I'll put it on the channel that I want to run and then I shut the screen backlight completely off. That would be one major improvement that they could do on this radio, and pretty much any radio, is get the screen right. It's not that hard, I wouldn't think. There's a lot of things that go into these radios. I think they could make the screen dimmable, right? Like the rest of the accessories that are out on the market these days. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is move this switch panel back a little bit so I can get this mounted up here. Man, this is dusty up here. I think this should be a 10 millimeter, yeah. I'll just get this off. You can see I made this little bracket here. And we'll call that Todd Fabrication. How about that? And we're going to take this off. We're just going to slide it over a little bit. So that should give me enough play in that wire that I can slide that over. So this is going to end up going, I think, right here, somewhere in this vicinity. Now I'm going to have to move. This is just a KC highlight rock light that I've got mounted up here, and I have that hooked up to one of the auxiliary switches too. And boy, it provides an amazing amount of light if you need it. You know, here, because you know the built-in lights aren't very good, but I'm gonna have to probably slide this back maybe to here. So I just moved this switch panel out of the way. It was over here. I moved it over here to the side, and that's gonna allow me to mount the head unit for the radio right in here, kind of on an angle like that. And then the light that I had mounted, I actually just moved it back here a little bit and just remounted it. So that's a really good spot for that. We are at the point where I've got to figure out how I'm going to mount the head unit up on top of that molle panel. And as I showed you before, this piece slides into this bracket, but if I just use that, it's just going to mount vertically, like facing the ground. So that's not going to work. So I found a scrap piece of just aluminum angle iron, and I bent it to the degree that I want. Now I just need to mount it to the back of this. I've got some holes that are already drilled in here, and once I mount this on here, when it's mounted on the molle panel, then it'll give me a nice kind of angle downwards where it'll be a good, you know, sight view for me from the driver's seat. So I think this is going to work well. I just spray painted it black so you don't see it. So let's get this thing bolted on here and see how it works out. All right, it's plastic on metal. I don't think I need a log washer, but I'm going to put that in there anyway. Screw that down. This paint is not drying too well because, believe it or not, it is a little bit humid here. I know that's, let me just make sure I put this on correctly because I don't want to mount it upside down. Okay, I think we should be good. I think I got everything ready to go with that bracket. I've got a couple of small machine screws to mount it up here to the molle panel. We've got the cable to run. I'm actually gonna run that cable back this way and down through the panel between the passenger door and the passenger back seat door, all the way down to the floor. Because for right now, I'm gonna mount the radio underneath the passenger seat. So we'll get going on that. If I don't drop one of these washers while I'm doing this, that will be an amazing accomplishment, because usually they fall between the seats, never to be found again. Perfect. All right, let's see what that looks like from underneath. So I need to fish this wire in from the back, and this wire is what connects. Yep, there you go. First mistake. I'm gonna have to put this wire through before mounting it to this metal bracket back here. So I gotta take this off and do that again. Well, that was an easy fix. I actually just had to undo the one side and slide that wire through, and got it up here now. Tighten down the nuts. I'm gonna slide this in. There you go. I think that's gonna be good right there. It's at a nice angle. Got the channel selector here. These are the volume selectors for the two different channels. Now, I don't want to get everybody super excited because we're not all the way done. We're just zip tying the control wires, those Cat 5 wires that go from the head unit back down to the base unit on this molle panel. And then this part will be done. And then we'll get working on installing the electrical and the antenna for the base unit itself. So one of the things I like about having this molle panel up here is it allows me to mount some accessories, you know, the head unit, the switch panel, an extra light, my glass breaker tool, flashlight, you know, all within an arm's reach while I'm driving. And because there's not a lot of space to do this stuff in the JL for sure, and I'm sure a lot of other vehicles as well. But I found this pretty handy to have this up here. Operation zip tie complete. So one of my absolute favorite parts of these projects is fishing wires through these plastic panels. Now, I've already broken the clips off of this side panel out a couple of different times, so I think there's only half of the clips left on here. So we'll see how many more I can break today. But I kind of have this wire pulled in through here so far, and I'm just going to tuck it back down in that way. I'll just pull that through, and then we'll tuck it in all the way down to under the seat. Those two wires are now fished down through those plastic panels, and they coming out right down here by the seat. Now I pulled this other panel off here because we're going to run a new antenna line up to the passenger side right by the hood. So we're going to work on that now. Let's take a second and talk about antennas. I've tried a couple different ones. I've tried a couple in different places. And I'm going to tell you the story of why I'm going to put it, where I'm going to put it. But let's see what I have right now. Right now I have this Midland, and this is the Ghost antenna. And it's nice as a low profile antenna, but where it's mounted right there, it's no good mounted right there. Because anytime that I turn on this cheap off-road light, it interferes with the reception of the radio. Because the bracket that I have this antenna mounted on is mounted right to the same bracket that this light is mounted on. And this light was about 20 bucks online. So you can imagine the frivolous RF energies that this thing puts out whenever you turn it on. So it's about useless to use with this light on. Now the other thing here, the reception, I think right here, not a good spot. Now I've mounted it in a couple different areas before. I had it mounted up here. One time I had a bracket right on the hood. That worked pretty well. I had it mounted back here off the hood. That wasn't too bad either. I also had it mounted over here on the driver's side in the same spot, kind of in this area. but I really want to mount it on the passenger side. And the reason is when I'm shooting video out the driver's window, I don't want to see the antenna. So I've been using this ghost antenna. But I've also been using this Midland antenna. And this is a 32-inch antenna for GMRS. And the reception on this thing is a lot better than this ghost antenna. So I really want to use this one. So I'm going to end up mounting this antenna, I believe, right about here. And I'm going to use this longer antenna. It just works out better when I'm trying to reach somebody that's far away, or if I'm in the middle of the forest, you know, up in northern Arizona. This antenna just works better. So I'm going to use that one. I'm going to use this bracket to mount it to the hood. The nice thing about this bracket is it's got a two-way swivel. So you can swivel it this way, or you can swivel it this way. So when you have it on your hood, you can make it nicely straight up and down and then straight side to side, just based on being able to move this. Now, I said I had this mounted here before, and you can see how it really nicked up the inside of my hood because this weld here was a little thicker down in this way, and it just didn't mount right. So when I mounted it down here, you can still see some marks, but the weld was not nearly as thick. So that's actually where I'm going to put it in that range. So the way that this works is this fits over the lip of the hood right in here, and there's this little strip of aluminum that goes inside this where you tighten down these little screws, and it's just the pressure of it mounts it right onto the hood, and it actually works pretty good. There's a big thick rubber piece right here, so it's not going to impact your paint. Just going to dry fit this in here. Got the screws all the way open. I think that feels pretty good right there. It's not quite halfway down the hood, but it is a little bit further away from the windshield to get that antenna a little bit more clearance. I'm going to lower the hood. We're going to straighten it up and put the antenna on. It's not going to hit anything on the way down. Oh yeah. They're actually hitting right in here. You can see where I had it before. It's hitting in there. It was hitting in there too. All right. Problem solving time. The problem is these little screws are just too long, and it's hitting on the edge of my panel there. So I'm going to have to shorten these up. I think I may try to screw them in and cut off the inside, because I still have to get the Allen wrench in the outer part. I was thinking that maybe the inside was pointed, but it's not, it's flat. So if I screw these in pretty far and then cut it, I think that'll do the trick. Got the first two done. I just found this random saw blade in my toolbox. It's a really fine blade, but I don't know where the handle for this thing is, so I'm just using the blade. And it's working so far. Just took a cool down break because it's hot. Got a refill here. Finished cutting these off, so let's give it a test fit and see if it works. Here goes nothing. I think I had it right about here. Okay, I tightened them down all the way. There's just a little bit of the end of that sticking out, so it's going to be really close. Let's give it a shot. I think we're in good shape. It's not touching. So now we just need to secure the hood down, get this in a nice flat position, and wire it up. I got this mounted. I have the antenna mount seated in there. I'm going to mount the actual antenna on here once I run the cable. So I'm going to run the cable into the cab, under the passenger seat, and then we'll go from there. Ooh, that's a little dirty in there. So I'm just going to run this cable the same way that I ran the old one. This is the old one. I'm just going to cut this one out and pull the end out so we can get rid of that. And the new one, we'll just run the same way. I have all 3 wires coming in through here now, so we're all set. I just need to get rid of this plug, cut this off, and wire in the harness for the radio. We are ready to do some wire cutting here, folks. Cut that bad boy, we'll strip it down. So I just had a little bit of a delay. When I started stripping those wires that were under the back seat that were powering the old Midland radio, I said, wow, you know, these wires seem really thin. And then I looked at the wires that were coming out of the back of the Wouxun radio, the KG-1000, and they're a lot thicker. So looking at the wires that were hooked up to the Midland are only 16 gauge wire. The wires coming out of the new radio are 14 gauge. So I do not want to run this radio connecting it up to that smaller gauge wire. So I had to run out to AutoZone, pick up some 14 gauge wire. So now that we've got that, we can get back to wiring this thing up. So this bundle of wires are the wires that are connected to the auxiliary switches. And you can see here, there's a couple that are 14 gauge wire, and there's a couple that are really thin wire. Not even sure what gauge that is. But if you remember, the amperage that these can handle is only 15, and these can handle the 40. So this is the wire that I'm going to hook up to this radio. So let's strip this down. I've got the new 14 gauge, and we'll hook that up. All right, let's solder it up. Now, I never won an award for soldering, and this tip is not even the right tip for this, but we'll give it a shot, see if it works. I got the hot wire hooked up. Now I just need to hook this ground up. So right here in the footwell, there's the grounding spot. I've already got something grounded here now. 10mm wrench, we'll get that off, and we'll put the ground on there. It got a little dark last night to wrap that up, so I had to stop, but we're back at it today. But let me get you caught up with what I ended up working on last night. First thing is I ended up running that wire that we soldered, and I put it in this wire loom here because I wanted to protect that wire. So I ran it down in this channel, and you can see it comes out right here and goes under the seat. So that should give it a lot of protection where I don't have to worry about that wire getting you know, beat up or scuffed up or something like that. Now for the radio, originally I was going to mount that under the seat, but I've got enough wire here that I think I might mount it kind of back here. It's out of the way, it's out of sight, And I think that will work almost better than under the seat, because this thing gets pretty hot when you transmit. You can see it's actually got a fan here. And when you go to transmit, that fan kicks on. So I think this will help keep it a little bit cooler. So I'm going to mount it right here. Bracket is mounted. Let's get the radio in there. It's going to be tough to get the screws on the bottom tightened, but I think I've got a short enough screwdriver where I can get that done. I think this is going to work better than under the seat, just for the airflow alone, because this thing does get hot. The more I look at this, the more I like the location right in the middle between the two back seats. It still allows me to use this floor space when I have the seat all the way up if I'm camping or something. Same thing with the driver's seat, so that's really out of the way. I'm just going to put some wire loom on those power wires just to make it so it doesn't stick out. Using 1/2-inch wire loom here. Hopefully this will get it over that fuse block. I think it's the biggest size that I have. So I ended up using this black wire loom. I just think it looks more professional. It'll hide the wires. I'm going to tuck them in underneath this center console, and I just think it's going to give it a more of a professional look. So you can see I ran the cables back underneath the seat mount here, and that's going to keep it tucked up out of the way and then underneath this plastic. I actually cut a little piece out here to give it a little more room for that wiring to come out, and I think that's going to look pretty solid. And this is what it looks like with the seat all the way pushed back. You can barely see those wires under there. Since I had all of this plastic molding opened from running the wires, I decided to actually run some additional wires for future use. I've got one 12 gauge, two 14 gauge, and one 16 gauge wire that I can use down the road. So you never know when you're going to need more wiring in your Jeep, but I think that should last me a while. Now, the only thing that I was thinking about doing was running some wiring for a compressor, to mount a compressor back here, but that's going to take really thick gauge wire, maybe all the way down to like 8 gauge. I'd have to look it up, so I'm not going to fit that in this channel. I'd have to run that separately. So future project on there if I ever decide to hardwire my compressor in, which who knows, I probably will, but I think this should help me out down the road. I think we're done. Let's go through the checklist and see if we hit everything. So the first thing was reinstalling the antenna with a different mount and the different antenna. So we've got that set up pretty nice. It's wired in, all the wires hidden underneath here. Second thing was installing the new radio and running the electrical wiring. So let's check that out. We ran all the new electrical wiring underneath the panel, and then also wired it up underneath here. You can see I still have the wires hanging down there, but this whole panel is back in place. I even vacuumed because my Jeep was very dirty. And back here, we've got the wiring underneath the seat, and we've got the radio mounted right there. Now, as for the control unit, the head unit per se, we've got that mounted up here on the molle panel, and it looks pretty good. Now, all we got to do is go for a test drive and make sure that it works. Time to give this thing a test. I've got Nicholas in the house with the handheld, and we're just going to see if it transmits and receives. WRP 639. Nicholas, are you able to hear me good in there?
Copy, loud and clear.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to go test this out, see if I can hit one of the repeaters. All right, there you go. Transmits, receives. Let's go see if I can hit one of the repeaters. All right, I've unsuccessfully tried to hit a repeater and nothing comes back. I don't even get a kickback. So let me try one more time. I'm going to try the Shaw Butte 700 repeater in North Phoenix. So WRP for a radio check on Shaw Butte 700. Yeah, see, it's transmitting, but I'm not getting a kickback from the repeater, so I don't know if I have the tones in there correctly. I'm going to have to go play with that. I haven't touched that since I reinstalled it, and we'll have to go back and take a look at it. Alright gang, I've had a good time putting the radio back in, getting the antenna installed. Now keep in mind, I am not a mechanic, and I am not an electrician, so that's your disclaimer. What I do on my Jeep, I do on my Jeep. Doesn't necessarily mean you should do on your Jeep. So, hey, appreciate you watching. Take care.